The Middle East is burning by design. Benjamin Netanyahu has shackled Western interests to a terminal ethnic project. This is the strategic autopsy of a collapsing apartheid state and the mathematical proof that the Zionist dream has reached its end. The Middle East is in flames. Britain is currently being dragged into a war of choice where the strategic objectives are non-existent. This conflict serves one man, Benjamin Netanyahu. He chose this war to preserve his political survival. The West continues to follow Israel's lead despite a total erosion of regional stability. This indulgence is a strategic failure. It actively compromises the national security of the United States and the United Kingdom. Palestine is the site where Western moral credibility officially collapses. Israel is a product of European racism that has become a primary manufacturer of it. Zionism was born from the trauma of the Holocaust and a desire for a safe haven where Jews were hosts, not guests. Supporters frame this as a biblical return. This narrative grants the state a moral license unavailable to other colonial projects, but the cost was the systematic erasure of the Palestinian people. Their experience of dispossession mirrors global, European colonialism, yet it is arguably more brutal because of Western complicity. By January 2026, Israel's population reached 10.1 million. This numerical growth masks a decaying foundation. The Zionist dream is built on the active subjugation of an indigenous population. It is a structure designed for permanent war. The only democracy in the Middle East is a strategic myth. This fiction died in 1967 with the occupation of Gaza and the West Bank. Today, 5 million Palestinians live under absolute Israeli military control with zero right to vote for the government that manages their lives. One state, two systems, divided by bloodline. Jewish settlers in the West Bank enjoy full civil rights. Their Palestinian neighbors live under military law. Even in annexed East Jerusalem, Palestinians remain disenfranchised non-citizens. Political rights in this land are determined by ethnicity, not law. This is not a democracy. It is a textbook apartheid state. But Salem, Israel's premier human rights organization, has confirmed this reality. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have reached the same verdict. Israel maintains a regime of apartheid between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. Look at the checkpoints. They are not security measures. They are machines of dehumanization. Elderly men and women stand for hours in the sun, waiting for 8-year-old conscripts to grant them passage. This creates a daily cycle of rage and humiliation. The Israeli state has built a machine to crush the Palestinian will, but it has only succeeded in eroding its own moral fabric. By 2026, the financial and social cost of maintaining this military apparatus has reached a terminal breaking point. The Jewish state is a garrison. One population holds the keys, the other is suffocating. 1948 is the root of the current terminal crisis. Over 80% of the Palestinian population fled their homes during the Nakba. They were there in 1947. They were gone by 1949. Israel denied them the right to return, turning a refugee crisis into a permanent act of ethnic cleansing. Zionism sought a refuge, but it inflicted that desire on a population with no connection to European anti-Semitism. Other settler colonial projects succeeded through demographic catastrophe. The United States, Australia, and Canada replaced indigenous populations through disease and genocide. Israel lacks this path. Disease will not do the work for the Israeli state. Despite 8 decades of state-sponsored expulsion, 50% of the population between the river and the sea remains Palestinian. The demographic math has failed. Israel cannot become Australia. It remains a tiny country squatting on the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the heart of the Middle East. It exists in a state of permanent contempt for the history and culture of its neighbors. This isolation creates a garrison mentality. Oppressing a population for 80 years makes the oppressor miserable. When you dehumanize others, you dehumanize yourself. By 2026, periodic military slaughter has failed to break the Palestinian spirit of resistance. You cannot build a healthy society on a foundation of stolen land. The result is a nation in permanent antagonism with its own geography. Israel has hit a demographic wall. 7 million Jews and 7 million Palestinians now occupy the same land. The fantasy of reducing Palestinians to a cultural remnant selling souvenirs to tourists is dead. This 50-over-50 parity dictates the future. Israel is currently veering toward theocratic fascism to maintain control. This trajectory requires perpetual, escalating violence. The only alternative is the granting of full civil, political, and human rights to every inhabitant. Whether this is one state or two is secondary to the removal of ethnic domination. Palestinians have consistently shown a readiness to compromise. Yasser Arafat accepted far less than equality in the 1990s. Even those around Hamas seek simple equality. The obstacle is the Israeli requirement for ethnic primacy, maintaining a Jewish state through 2,000-year-old biblical claims while denying 80-year-old property rights is racist and untenable. A right of return for Jews must be matched by a right of return for Palestinians. The status quo is a historical aberration. Less than 8 million Jewish Israelis cannot dictate terms to 500 million Arabs forever. The balance of power is shifting. The system of ethnic supremacy in the Eastern Mediterranean will end. The demographic reality has already made the decision. The alliance between the West and Israel is a strategic suicide note. Washington pours $3.8 billion in foreign military financing (FMF) into the Israeli state every year. By 2026, this investment has yielded a catastrophic return for Western interests. The myth of Israel as an unsinkable aircraft carrier is a geopolitical fiction. Actual U.S. aircraft carriers project power more effectively without the moral baggage. This alliance forces the West into permanent antagonism with 2 billion Muslims. It tethers American diplomacy to a state with no significant natural resources and creates friction in global energy markets. Western leaders are trapped in a sunk cost fallacy. Deep state connections between the CIA and Mossad keep the relationship alive, but the cost now outweighs any intelligence benefit. Support for Israel compromises the moral standing of the United States. It forces Washington to ally with dictators to suppress the will of the Arab people, who overwhelmingly oppose the Zionist project. The Western political class is morally compromised by supporting a state the rest of the world identifies as racist. A rational cost-benefit analysis reveals that billions are poured down the throat of a state that offers only repression in return. This alliance is a historical relic. It ignores the reality of a world that no longer accepts ethnic supremacy as a legitimate form of government. The internal rot of the Israeli state is its final driver. Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich represent the heart of the 2026 government. They openly revel in the prospect of centuries of brutal repression. This is the terminal point of ethnic primacy. When a state is structured for domination, it must eventually abandon its democratic mask. Look at the leadership of the Knesset. The deputy speaker was photographed holding a noose and a lethal injection to celebrate the death penalty for Palestinians. Beside her, a man held a gun labeled occupation and a plane labeled expulsion. This grinning specter is not an outlier. It is the face of the Israeli parliament. This is what oppression does to the oppressor. It disfigures the soul of the nation. The psychological cost of 8 decades of occupation is unavoidable. Dehumanizing others dehumanizes the self. The occupier becomes miserable, spiritually bankrupted by the act of subjugation. This is the final price of Zionism. The Israeli public must ask if this disfigured leadership is the civilization they intended to defend. Beyond the moral decay lies a cold, mathematical reality. 8 million Jewish Israelis cannot dominate a region of 500 million Arabs and 100 million Iranians. This balance of power cannot endure. The era of ethnic supremacy is ending. Mainstream media refuses to question these fundamentals. They remain silent while deep state connections drive the West toward disaster. This silence necessitates independent media to pick apart the assumptions underlying this relationship. The end of the current system is a historical certainty. The tragedy is that Israel never learned to live as a neighbor rather than an overlord. The dream of domination has become a nightmare of permanent war. The only path to survival is the granting of full civil, political, and human rights to all. Without equality, there is only the inevitable end.